Hello, everyone. So today we're doing our CCM live stream for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today I'm joined by Molly Langfels. Um, and then we'll just do our introductions and we'll get right into this. So my name's Matthew. I'm a sophomore at DePaul studying secondary history education, and my pronouns are he, him, his, and I'll pass this off to Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly Langfels. I am a junior at DePaul, and I am a history major with minors in Spanish and urban planning. And then my pronouns are she, her, hers.
All right. If you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to leave them in the comments. We'll answer them as we go. But I just want to hop right in, and I want to ask Molly, what's a general overview that we can have when we're looking at the topic of domestic violence?
So, domestic violence is a very important topic. Just a general understanding of it is that it's violence or other abuse in a domestic setting, such as if you're like married to somebody, or just basically violence happening within a household of some sort. So this violence can range from physical to verbal and emotional, as well as economic, religious, and sexual abuse. So it really
Hmm.
covers a very wide range of abuses that can be inflicted on someone, which is why it's such an important topic because it can
Hmm.
hit so many different people in so many different ways, which makes it a really intricate issue because it's not just one standalone thing.
Hmm.
So that's basically a general overview because if you go further into it, then there's so many intricacies that are involved with it that then make it a little more difficult to understand because there's so many nuances with it all.
Hmm. Okay. So when we're looking at this, then how do we look at domestic violence awareness then through the lens with the Vincentian mission?
Well, with the Vincentian mission, obviously we're looking to help others and make it so that everybody has a safe and welcoming place so that we can work towards the mission of God. Um, but sorry, I lost my train of thought. Could you please repeat the question? I just
Yeah,
want to
no,
make sure
that's
that I
okay.
fully answered it.
That's totally okay. I was asking for how are we connecting this then to our Vincentian values and mission?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, being a Vincentian, I feel like working towards the betterment of other people and making sure that everybody is welcomed, and like the focus on social justice in for the Vincentians is really important, which ties the issue of domestic violence into the Vincentian mission to begin with.
Hmm.
I just feel like they tie together at their core because it's the question of what must be done, and then you have
Hmm.
an issue, and then you're able to approach it there with
Hmm.
the question of what must be done. So I feel like they just fit together very well because it is something that needs to be addressed. And if it's something that is harming God's children, like you need to work to fix that injustice.
Yeah. So at DePaul, we like to ask the question of what must be done. What do you have an answer? Do you think to like what must be done then for us as Vincentians for this?
I don't think that there is one specific
Hmm.
answer. I think that everybody with their different talents and understandings of the world is able to go and approach this issue on a personal basis. Um,
Hmm.
but something that can be done by everybody is spreading awareness, just talking about it, bringing it up, knowing the signs to look for to see, like, hypothetically, if one of your friends or your family members are in a situation where they are experiencing domestic violence, knowing the signs and knowing how to take
Hmm.
action and how to approach it in a compassionate and empathetic manner so that you're
Hmm.
not worsening the situation and you are supporting that person. So I think awareness
Hmm.
and, if possible, like training for how to
Hmm.
deal with it. And I mean, just knowing what it is. Because if you don't know what it is, then you can't tackle the subject.
And I think that goes really well into then our presentation that we have set up then for us, or we're going over this. I remember we were talking about this. Um, how I like how you said that it's like it's not this one individual issue because I really do feel this gets into this idea with domestic violence, this idea of like rape culture. and this idea with the myth of the average American. Because oftentimes I feel that there can be this idea that like the someone who commits rape is not someone who or commits domestic violence is not the someone who's like the average American. You know, they're not your like football quarterback. They're not your just like the person you like wouldn't like assume to be, because we have this idea in our mind of who can be a rapist, who can commit domestic violence, while in reality we do see that a lot of times it is acquaintances and family members who are actually committing this a lot of times. And I really like how this gets in our next issue of like this makes it where domestic violence and rape are not individual crimes because of this. A lot of times these are societal issues that we are failing to address. And I like how you said that. And I'm curious of then what's your thoughts on how do we come look at combating this idea of rape culture, toxic masculinity, and like bro culture as like a whole? How do you think that we can like as Vincentians then look to challenge these like embedded ideas?
I first want to address the fact, like the whole myth of the, um,
Hmm.
like the person who is doing it and the average American,
Hmm.
because it is very dangerous to have this idea of what a rapist is, or like of what a person who could commit violence against another person is, because there's no cookie
Hmm.
cutter. Like, of course, you have people like serial killers or serial rapists who, yes, of course, that's terrible, but that's not all that there is. And it's important to recognize that anybody could be one,
Hmm.
and not just be like, oh, you don't fit these criteria, so therefore you can't be one. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that's really important. But I think getting rid of the stigma of talking about rape and
Hmm.
talking about violence is a good step, because if you're opening the floor for people to talk about their experiences and ask questions, because of course there's a lot of questions. I mean, everybody's situation is different, and if you've been through it, you have you have a story to tell, and if you decide to tell it, then you should have a space to tell it and people who
Hmm.
will willingly listen. And then once you get rid of the stigma, then you can work towards explaining the situations to people who are more likely to be perpetrators, or just like people in general, because once you start talking about it, once you start approaching the topic of toxic masculinity, then
Hmm.
you're able to break down some of these barriers as people recognize that they don't have to be like that, that there are other options, and you
Hmm.
can work with people, especially on like a one-on-one um, kind of situation. I think it's important because then you're able to foster relationships with people and just work to be more
Hmm.
healthier version of yourself, because ultimately that will only assist the people around you, whether they may be going through something like this or not.
Okay, yeah. So then I did bring this quote with us today from the USA Today, and it said, "Bro culture refers not to the macho behaviors in general, but also to the darker things like binge drinking, sexism, rape culture, and other elements associated with hypermasculinity." Um, with this idea that we are just fostering this idea and we're fostering this toxicity within us, what are some examples you think that are like good signs of like this idea that toxic masculinity coming through, and that we can like see and be aware of and try and like look out for?
I think, well, one instance that you could look out for is responses of especially men to gay men being like, oh, I don't want to go to like a gay bar because everybody will hit on me. Or being like, oh, I don't want to talk to you because you're gay, because you're going to hit on me and have a crush on me. Like, that's very toxic, because that's
Hmm.
not necessarily true. And it just, having that idea of what the LGBT community is
Hmm.
just wrong. Um, but I think just, oh, there's so many different instances. In the quote, it
Hmm.
mentions drinking, forcing others to
Hmm.
drink. I would say that that's very toxic, and being like, oh, you need to get blackout drunk, or like there's expectations when you're going to drink. Um, and I would say that expectations of like society as a whole do very much promote toxic masculinity. I mean, if you look at how our president acts, like there's so
Hmm.
many instances of just that toxic masculinity and just being like a toxic person in general. Like, it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily have to bring the masculinity into it, but that is a very large part of it. So there's so many examples that could be covered, but I think
Hmm.
that society as a whole, while we are working towards breaking down these stigmas and these stereotypes and working towards being more open with ourselves and others, I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Thank you. So then, going into our next bit of this, then, when we're talking about how do we support survivors, I remember you talked about this a bit on our last slide, but there's this, and you mentioned how it's very important that we foster this belief that like it's important that we just listen and like believe survivors. And I wanted to ask you about like how have we struggled today in society to have this belief and have this conversation of just we need to listen to survivors.
Well, I think as a survivor myself, like there's a lot of
Hmm.
it's difficult to bring things up. It's difficult to have conversations about it because you don't know how people are going to respond.
Hmm.
Thankfully, I have a very, very amazing group of friends and a phenomenal support system. So I recognize that I can talk about it if I need to, if I want to, but it's still
Hmm.
very difficult. I think a lot of it is allowing the person to grieve and process things as they need to, and just making sure that the person knows that you're there for them and you don't expect anything of them, but if they need
Hmm.
you, that they can come to you. So leaving the door open, I think, is really important. And then also, if you're in the position to do so and the person is in the position to like get help, go like seek therapy, seek other
Hmm.
means of processing and getting through whatever you're going through. But I think that listening and
Hmm.
going at it with an open heart and an open mind and believing the person is the most important part. Making them feel valid is just extremely important and is very necessary.
100%. Um, and like going on top of that, with our idea, I remember also in you mentioned this of like this idea of like yeah being there for like supportiveness, and a lot of times people can find themselves we find financially dependent or emotionally dependent on their abuser. So I find it very true that for this idea of needing this conversation of like having this acknowledgement of the difficulty of the situation and just acknowledging the emotions of the survivor.
Yes, I agree. That's very important. And also recognizing that you can only, as an outside person, you can only do
Hmm.
so much. And if they are in an abusive situation, like an ongoing one that they can't get out of, that ultimately you can only do so much. And sometimes they don't recognize the situation that they're in until they're able to open their eyes to it. And
Hmm.
sometimes people just aren't going to see it until they want to. And being able to work with that person and being patient with them is
Hmm.
so important. Patience is definitely key.
I like that. Patience being key. Um, how, as like as Vincentians, how do we learn? Because like as Vincentians, a lot of times we are geared around this idea of social justice and helping those around us. Um, how do we then, as Vincentians, learn that like as you're saying, like we can only do so much. We have to be like patient. We can't force anyone to do anything that they don't want to do, and we can't force anyone to recognize a bad situation. So how does we Vincentians then um, go about still being like supportive but not forcing anyone in any way? How do we go about this?
I think fostering very genuine conversations with the person or people, because, like I said, if they don't want to recognize it, they're not going to recognize it, and it's very easy to keep on your rose colored glasses.
Hmm.
But as Vincentians, I think it's important to have conversations with them and say, hey, I respect your relationship, but I have some concerns and I just want to make sure that you're doing well and that you're being taken care of and you're taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
And sort of like highlighting what healthy or unhealthy behaviors are happening. Obviously, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but fostering a sense of like fostering that relationship with somebody then allows for them to understand that they have a support system to then go to later if
Mhm.
slash when they recognize that they need to get out of a situation or they want to talk. So fostering that relationship, which I think relationships are super important for the
Mhm.
Vincentians as well, so that should be highlighted as something that needs to be continued despite how frustrating it may be that you can't help your friend anymore to get out of the situation that they're in.
And I like that you mentioned this, that like we can only do so much because we do have with us today this idea like you were talking about of like we can only do so much, and so we gathered some resources that are available for those who are suffering from domestic violence. The first number is goes straight to the hotline, to the domestic violence hotline in US. Below that, we then also have the hotline and website for the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I want to talk real quick just about this last idea of you talked about being there for them, make sure they're there. Um, with how with this idea of like a safety plan, something that's personalized for their safety, as like if you as being there with that relationship with them, how would you then you feel go about to like helping with this idea of the safety plan? Is it just being there as like someone who can just like as you said, being that community, someone that they can go to if they need like help, someone to talk to, like a shoulder to be on, or how do we look at that as intentions?
I think it depends on the person and it's very much a case by case basis because
Hmm.
what one person needs is not what another person needs.
Hmm.
So the safety plan very much can differ. It can be,
Hmm.
like I was saying before, just a support system, but it can also be helping house somebody or giving them money so they can get out of the situation that they're in and get to safety. Whatever that may be, I think is what needs to be done. And working with that person to figure out what they
Hmm.
need and not what you want to put onto them because you think that that will be best in the situation.
Hmm. I like that, not putting on what you think is good for them, letting them know and understand what they see as correct. I then last bits. We have other resources here too. Of course, legal help. I put in here womenslaw.org is a very good organization to reach out to in case that you were ever to need legal help, or someone, or if you know someone who would need legal help. And also, legal service corporations as well is a very good source of outreach. And then the Immigrant Legal Resource Center and womenslaw.org, they offer information about the rights as immigrants as well for this, which you will be guaranteed for that.
Beautiful. I think that these are all really good sources and places to reach out to if you need to.
Hmm. And wrapping around about time we're trying to finish at, Molly, did you have any more comments that you wanted to say?
I think just be patient with yourself, whether you're going through something or you know somebody that's going through something. Um, and remember that there are resources to reach out to if you need them and that people do care about you and want the best for you. And just
Hmm.
reminding yourself of that constantly because the more you recognize your worth, then the more likely you are to recognize if you're in an unhealthy or abusive situation.
Thank you for that, Molly. And I just want to like say such a big thank you for being here to speak with us and just being here in general. I'm very grateful for that you're here to speak on this topic. It's very important, I feel. And I just like to thank everyone who watched this as well and was here to participate in it.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Um, so with that note, then we'll just close out. And I hope you all learned something very good today.